Hi, welcome back to It's Her Turn. I'm your host, Dr. Kate Dow, and today we're going to tackle looking at digging into and being courageous and compassionate about the topic of domestic violence, National Awareness of Domestic Violence Month. And boy, there's lots here, but I kind of want to just really be particular in this particular podcast to speak about what does it mean to do our as women as more the, domestic violence is across all genders, across all you know socioeconomic statuses, ethnicities, and the, right now we do know that it's always still a much higher percentage of women. So, this podcast is about abuse in general, but let's acknowledge that, this podcast does focus on women and their equity challenges. So, going into Domestic Violence Awareness Month, know that um I really like the theme. The theme is everyone knows someone. And this is so powerful and important, and a big part of why I'm calling it, like this fearless work of being courageous and compassionate, because to pay attention, to be willing to notice when women are struggling, is a big part of us kind of changing the stigma around being in abusive relationships. I've shared some on this podcast that my marriage was an emotionally and mentally abusive relationship with threats of physical and sexual violence. Um, I left that marriage over 22 years ago, but it's very real and a big part of my experience, because there was lots of ways that prior relationships kind of, we could say, prepared me for being not aware. There was other relationships that had little elements of domestic violence, that controlling, eh, you know, taking power positions behavior that was happening. So, why is it important that we sort of break the stigma? Because I'll tell you, when I was going through it, I had incredible shame. I felt like there was nobody I knew who was going through that or that was talking about it. And I was a therapist in the community, and I felt like, what is wrong with me? Like, why am I going through this? As if, being a therapist means that you have an ability to be a superwoman and not have your own issues, which is not true, right? In fact, a lot of us go into counseling seeking our own healing and a desire to help others, because we know how horrible it is to suffer and go through mental and emotional pain and struggles. So, when I think back, I believe that, there's many people who saw the signs, but they were terrified. They didn't know what to do. We tend to do this thing of like, well, women are okay. They'll leave when they know they need to. Or we judge them because why didn't you leave? Right? That's a really common misconception, that you are just making a choice to stay there. But when you're psychologically wound up in domestic violence, every bit of your uh, internal fear and need to be safe or feel loved or feel okay is kind of wrapped up in that relationship, with all of your hope and fear combined all together. It's very difficult to describe, but it's like, it's not good. You know that that person most likely isn't going to change, but that doesn't matter, because your desire to help them change, for it to be okay, to make it work, is far more powerful. And that feeling that if I just, know that I can keep them from being mean, and I could be nicer, I could be better, I could be, kinder, or I could do more to help them, then they're going to change. Right. And we know that that's not true. Like now, right? We have much more evidence and, sort of research and things helping people know that we can't change other people. But when you're in that emotional dynamic, it's like every part of you is holding on to the hope and belief that things could be better because you've already invested or you've already attached to this person. And especially if you had kids, I had 2 kids, and so my desire to make things be what I wanted them to be was like, I'm going to give 1,000% every day because I want the family that I want, my kids to have. I want that family for the part of me that felt like I didn't get what I wanted and needed as a kid. And so we're just like desperately clinging to that relationship for that sense of I can make it work. Okay, that's one version. And of course there's lots of many others, like being terrified and threatened, you know, to leave, which that also showed up for me as well, that everything got way heightened when we were facing the reality this was not going to work, and then suddenly it was all my fault. And I had harassment and um ongoing harassing calls and threats to my life and things like that. So, we know that that's a huge piece too that gets caught up in that. So, I want to first talk a little bit about if you're somebody or somebody right now who is possibly in an unsafe situation. I want you to know that there's 3 things that you can do to help yourself or to help others. And this is where the courage to step up, even if that person gets mad at you, right? Because a lot of times when we reach out to women and say, well, maybe this isn't good, maybe you need to leave, they're highly defensive and frustrated because they're clinging to it. You have to remember they're clinging to this relationship to be what they need it to be. And so they might not be like, hey, thanks for telling me that. But let's go through the first 3 primary steps, okay? One is to, if you're in it or somebody, get support for you or help that person get support. And that could be calling a crisis hotline. Yeah, I have show notes of places, internet connections as well as the number I'm going to give you. The second one is to create a safety plan. You always do want to have a safety plan, meaning you have some clothes, you have some money, you have some food, you have things kind of stored somewhere that when you do decide to leave, that's a way to do that if you have all the support to make that happen. And then the third is to recognize that, internet safety, technology safety has become a much bigger issue for women who are in domestic violence situations. Even if they're not with that person anymore, there's like this whole epidemic of, bullying and control through technology. So, looking at how to change your email, change things on your technology, clearing browsing history and things like that. If you are living with somebody that is the perpetrator, these are all important parts of kind of protecting yourself while you are possibly looking at getting ready to leave or get support. Because, of course, as soon as you are starting to get healthier and recognize that, that's going to, kind of send off little, you know, markers in a sense for the perpetrator who's going to then feel threatened that you're leaving. And for them it's the same way, they're attached to you, you're the person they are relying on and controlling in order to feel more powerful and less afraid and terrified in their own lives. So it's a very powerful dynamic. And so those are the first 3 steps. And the phone number is like 1-800-799 SAFE, SAFE. So no, that's like the best national crisis hotline number that's available. Uh, so let's get back to the theme for this year. It's everyone knows someone, and also mourn, celebrate, connect. And that kind of, for me, is a really powerful part, because again, when I look back at my story and I think, you know, uh, I I didn't have anybody, even people I knew who were colleagues of mine who kind of, were more personal friends, and they never said like, why are you, how can I help you? Do you think it's good to stay? Um, they didn't have the languaging or the courage to speak up to what they thought might be happening. My own family was in denial, even though I was telling them about it. They were just not. capable of really seeing what was true. So this is what happens, right? The perpetrator isolates you, and then the people around you kind of pull back because they're uncomfortable or scared or feel helpless and don't know what to do. Or they've tried to reach out to you. This is a common thing. They've tried to support you, and then if you don't leave right that minute because you're not psychologically at that place yet in yourself to leave, they're like, "Oh, well, I already talked with you. I supported you, and now I'm just frustrated that you're staying in it." And it's like there's no empathy. It's like, have you ever been in that situation? Then you shouldn't be judging like, "Well, I talked to you once and I supported you. Why didn't you just leave?" As if like it's an open door. It's not. Psychologically, it is not an open door when you're in that situation. Again, it feels like your life depends on making this relationship work. And there's, of course, lots of reasons for that, depending on your own history with trauma, relationships, dynamics in your family, what you've grown up with, what you're used to, what you've tolerated. And it is not a simple decision because it does feel life threatening. It often is life threatening. And it is a dynamic that's like a closed system. Like if you're in a job and you don't feel like you can leave that job, but your boss is abusing you, but you need the money to take care of yourself and your kids, that's a closed system feeling. Like there's no way out, right? So this is where we just take the risk, right? This idea of the inner work is how do we, whether we're observers or friends of people we think might be going through it, or you yourself are going through it, we step into this courage to face what's true, what's possibly true, right? So if you're in it, you're like, I'm going to really have moments where I give myself permission to go, okay, I know how we want this to be. I know how we keep thinking we can make it be, but is it true that I can make this better? Is it true that this is going to be somehow different next week than it is right now? And just giving yourself permission to face that and question that gives us a little spaciousness, right? A little room to not just go, oh, I'm a bad person. This isn't working because I'm just not a good enough person, or he doesn't love me enough because I'm an awful, unworthy woman, right? We go into taking on the responsibility and the blame for them getting angry and abusive or violent. We take on the responsibility for making it better, but we really have to start looking at the responsibility for how it's affecting us, right? That's what we want to start working with, is how is it affecting us? And is it true that this could be could be better? I could have a different life if I wasn't in this relationship, that I deserve that and I could have that. But also, like, is it true, my story, my fear, my denial, that I need to stay here? That this is the only choice I have. That's the flip side of that, which, is just very painful. It's very painful to look at when you are in it and you feel like you've given your all and your life sort of depends on it. Then it's very hard to do that. So we just gently start to say, is this true? And if you know somebody, be courageous that sometimes they're going to look like everything's going good. They're going to pretend everything's good. And then there's times that they're really going to be struggling. And are you going to judge them and say, well, you know, why are you staying? That kind of thing that I talked about. Or are you going to say, I notice that, things get really hard for you at times. Can I support you? Do you want to talk? Do you need some support? Right? This is what we want to be courageous with, this idea of everyone knows someone. And that can be in your family, and that can be a person at work, or it could be a neighbor. Be courageous and be willing to approach and support a person. Now, it doesn't mean that that's suddenly your job, like, you're going to become their therapist. No, you're just saying, I'm just noticing. And then you can say, are you ready to reach out and find out more about some support, or look for a counselor, or look for a shelter, and just have that information? You know, we have to be more responsible to how we show up in ourselves and how we show up in the world. And that's really what I'm calling the fear less work, right? What does it take to step out of our comfort zone and be willing to be more conscious and honest with ourselves about what we're struggling with, and and what other people might be struggling with, and know that they matter. They're a part of our world, and if I know a woman is going through that, and I want to, I can't go in and say, okay, that's it, you need to go. I can go in and say, hi, I'm just letting you know, if you want to talk, I don't know what you're going through, but I'm here if you want, right? And give her your number, or just let her know. And maybe in that environment, you reach out to her again at some point. It's to move out of our judgment, both as a person who's been abused, the internal judgment we have of ourself is huge, right? The shame, the blame, the what's wrong with me, oh, and then being mean to ourselves, being condemning of ourselves. It's powerful, and that's a very painful place to start to recognize how we actually are doing that to ourselves. And that's part of a dynamic that we're playing out in that relationship of kind of taking it. So there's lots of layers of work to do, but let's just talk about this initial, like, becoming more aware as we're in this domestic violence awareness month. And that awareness is just to be more conscious, more willing to question ourselves, or reach out and say, "Are you okay?" to somebody. That is a very that's a rebellious thing to do in a society that says, mind your own business, go get your little world together, and if you're happy and you have your house and you have your partner and everything's good, then you're good. You're a solitary, you know, uh Shangri-La, and you don't have to care about anybody else. But that is so not real, because if we look at it from a more spiritual perspective, we're all connected. So if we are saying, well, I'm good, but they're not, and that's just too bad, and we don't have any care for them, we don't reach out to support them or even send them a blessing, or a a prayer, or reach out and say, would you like some resources? We are harming ourselves. We really are, because we're ignoring what's happening around us, and we're very much interconnected, even though we can think, oh, my life's great because I'm in my little bubble. So that's part of this idea that I'm going with around being fearless, to do that work of what keeps us from reaching out, what keeps us solo focused on our little bubble, and how do we start being more a part of the bigger solution that impacts us, whether you know it or not. When we turn a blind eye to domestic violence, we are literally supporting that to continue. And it, of course, has gone up in terms of percentages, um, because we know with COVID that women are often stuck at home with their perpetrators, and they have less access to other kinds of people or support. They have there less women are seeking help, because they are sort of, I believe, probably in a place of helplessness, because they're like, well, what's the point? We're in COVID and lockdown, and he's not letting me go to work, or he's not letting me even go talk to anybody. And there's a helplessness that happens there. And we're a part of the solution if we're willing to face our own places of fear, of facing, that when we're changing a pattern, it's kind of scary, right? Inside or out. It's scary to take that step, but it's a necessary step. Okay. We really are in this place of, we're in it together, or we're not going to make it as a humanity, is one way of looking at it. So I plan to do a follow-up podcast more about what are sort of the cyclical patterns, how do we recognize it. But today I really just wanted to talk about this idea of, how do we be more fearless if we're going through it, to ask those questions. Is this true? If I be nicer, that he's actually going to stop being abusive. Is that true? Is it true that he's suddenly going to get better if he hasn't really gone to counseling or done anything different? Is it true that this is as good as it gets, so I might as well just try and make this work? This abusive relationship? Is that true? Those were the things I needed to ask myself. And believe me, I did repeatedly. And I slowly took the steps to become more willing to see the reality of the situation, which is not easy, but so necessary. And from that, you kind of face the fire and you walk through the fire. And I will tell you, thank God that I had that part of me, that part of me that was willing to walk through the fire and come out the other side. It was brutal. It took a while. It was impactful for me and my children. I share about that on my TEDx talk, because it was really, challenging everything that I was trying to make happen and letting go of it and willing to go for my life can be much better than this. My kids' life deserves my kids deserve to have a much better life than this and to do the necessary one step at a time to change that. And I I know that I would do it again. Um, did I learn a lot? Yes, I learned a tremendous amount in that relationship, and healing from it has been an incredible process of understanding narcissism, his abuse that he had growing up, the impact in our family, the ancestral impact, my work of how I ended up there and what I was really trying to work through and what I really needed to be able to feel more whole. And that's the potential work we can do. All of us, we all have it in us. And with the right support, reaching out to counselors, reaching out to people who are skilled in this work is really important and helpful because we can't do it alone very well. It's too tangled and dark and difficult to really work out without that support and that outside neutral person who can help us see ourselves and see the steps we need to take. So I hope this was helpful. Yeah, I'm looking forward to coming back on next week and sharing more specifics about domestic violence, the impact of those relationships. How do we look at the signs? If you are in one and you're wondering, you can Google pretty easily just some basic signs of like, the person's kind of controlling and it might be super positive in the beginning, but suddenly they're kind of isolating you from other people and they're taking charge of your choices and they're limiting your freedom and sovereignty in a way. And as soon as you start to feel that, like, I'm not safe, I feel a little unnerved, a little uncertain here, then you listen to that. Then you listen to that, you talk to a friend. Um, One of the things that can happen is, we might have friends who are like, I don't like him. I don't like him. And we can kind of go, well, you just don't know him, right? He's actually this sweet person, and he may be a sweet person, but he's also a damaged person, right? So we're defending that part of him, but we're not seeing that the people around us are like, why are you with this person? Man or woman. Why are you with this person that's not treating you really well? And so be the friend who's courageous enough to question that. Be the friend who says, how are you? What's going on? And if you're the one in it, be willing to go, well, is that true that why are they saying that this person isn't good for me? Let me listen to that for a minute and wonder, if I should step back and just, take a pause. All right. Well, I hope this was helpful in our acknowledgement of domestic violence and how that can show up, for us personally and people around us. And I'll be back next week to share a little more about the inner work and the outer work. What does that look like to really start to take those steps? And what is it involved? And how, again, how can we support people, women, men who are in abusive situations, how can we support them to do that inner work and get the support to leave and heal? So, hope this was helpful and you're taking a little wisdom with you that's supporting you or someone you might know who would benefit from hearing this podcast. Please, leave us a review or subscribe if you're liking what you're hearing. And please feel free to reach out on Facebook to Dr. Kate Dow if you have a topic you'd like me to do a podcast on or you have a question. I am really interested in knowing what is it you want to know more about and how can I support you with this idea of it's your turn, right? Find your voice, own your truth, claim your power. Blessings.